Life and death, it's all a dance. Talking love and giving chance. Laughs and tears, we're here to share. Join us now, we're always there.
Hi, Jenna.
Hello, Noelle. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am doing okay. A little slow today. And I also realized that I have some like something divine intervention coming down from the sky into my head on camera. Do you see that?
Jenna, you always look like an angel, and you just look like an angel again today.
Thanks. So, what are you up to today, this week?
You know what? I feel like winter's really kind of hit me this week. Like I think that it's running its course. I think for a second I was thinking, "Oh wow, January sure is flying right by." And then all of a sudden I remembered we still have to get through February and March and like all the other winterish months.
You think January's flying by? I thought literally the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like I've been in January for at least a year and a half.
Oh, yeah, no, see, I feel like it's going faster than it usually does.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Until this week, and this week I just feel like, nope, just done.
No, done.
Ready for it to be spring someday. What's crazy is that by the time we post this episode, it'll probably be like March or April, and so we'll think, "Remember when January felt so very long, and here we are in June. It's summertime." Our guest today is I guess one of my like fake cousins. So her mom and my mom grew up really close as kids, and her grandmother, who just passed away last year, is my beloved Aunt Leslie, who I mention in my book, and
Oh,
I
right.
talk about how my mom never really experienced like unconditional love from her mother because she was just a bit my grandma was she was different. She's a different woman. But Aunt Leslie really made up for that because she was like the nurturing type. Rachel reached out to me and said that she could come onto the podcast and talk about her journey with IVF. Unfortunately, her failed journey with IVF and then her diagnosis with endometriosis. So this should be a really interesting conversation.
Do you wanna briefly say what IVF is? And you knew I was gonna say that, didn't you?
Jenna, I'm not a scientist. IVF, for those who don't know, is
Stands for
in vitro fertilization. Yes. I've
you
practiced
got
this a
it.
lot.
See? You knew. Maybe you are a science.
You should have heard me trying to explain to my nephew what IVF actually is, because it was not a good scenario. He thinks that you just get a makeshift baby and you just put them together in a petri dish.
That would make life so much easier in so
Tell me
many
about it.
situations.
Tell me about it.
Endometriosis is a condition in with the lining of your uterus, correct?
I'm sorry, are you asking me as if I'm Dr. Google?
Yeah. I was asking you, Doctor Google.
That is hilarious. You know what?
Why don't we wait for Rachel? She can clear it up.
Perfect. That sounds like a great plan. Oh, there she is. Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I am fantastic.
Hi, I'm Jenna, and Noelle is on delay, and she's always on delay.
So this is my fake cousin Rachel, and she has offered to come on our podcast. Rachel, I was just telling Jenna that, and I would like to tell the rest of our podcast listeners, just in case I edit that part out of myself, that obviously we know each other because our moms grew up together, and your grandmother was one of my favorite people in the whole entire world and helped to raise my mom because my own grandmother lacked some of the caring and nurturing qualities that some grandmothers have. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on today. If you would like to just to tell us what you thought would be a good thing to discuss on our podcast whenever we first posted our introductory episode.
So, Noelle and I have known each other for a really, really long time. A really long time. Actually, I knew you before you came along. And we'd sit around the table and they'd be like, "Oh, the Felkers are coming over." And I'm like, "Who are they?" "Well, they're your cousins." And I don't think, Noelle, I realized that we weren't actually related until like, I don't know, maybe middle school. I grew up in a very big Italian family, so everybody is family. And
Exactly.
then, obviously, Noelle, with your book coming out, and then with, your announcement about, you and your wife, I was like, you know what? I want to reach out to her and tell her my story because my story with the IVF in vitro fertilization is a little bit different. It was very complicated. So I reached out on Messenger and, kind of was just touching base a little bit and heard a little bit about her story. And I thought, well, this would be great to share my story, um, to let others know that they're not alone. A lot of times it can feel very lonely. Um, like the whole experience, successful, unsuccessful, whatever the case may be, but you can feel very lonely. And who do I talk to? Because you don't know who else has gone through it. So that's why I figured, you know what, I'll reach out and I'll tell my story.
So Noelle had also mentioned that you had
Yes.
endometriosis. Um, I asked Noelle to explain to everybody what that was, but she was just a little off today and couldn't explain that. So could you explain to everybody what that is?
So basically, the endometrial tissue within your uterus grows outside of your uterus rather than inside where it's supposed to. And then during your normal flow, everything flushes out. Um, so what happens is it builds up and it builds up. Many women have symptoms right away. It's whether it's painful cramping or heavy periods or bloating, they have some sort of symptom. But with me, I had no symptoms until I had all the symptoms. Um,
Okay.
yes, and it's very excruciating, but more women experience it than they know. Um, they just think it's regular, like, just cramps or moodiness or whatever. Um, you have to actually go and be diagnosed with it through ultrasounds and imaging and stuff like that. So, and then my endometriosis story actually starts right after my failed IVF attempts. So,
Okay.
like I said, we went through all of this stuff, and then all of a sudden, then this other thing came around. But that's basically what it is. And it can grow anywhere. Once it starts outside of the uterus, it can attach to fallopian tubes, to your ovaries, to your bladder, to your bowel, like anywhere that touches. Like I had two painful, very painful tumors about the size of a baseball. Um, yes, it was on the back of my uterus, pressing up against my bowel. That they had to go in and they had to get all that. So it's not even just like little bits, like you can actually get large tumors of it.
This all happened after you went through IVF and after you were diagnosed with it, or is this looking back, you realize some of the symptoms were, I guess, suggesting that that was what it was?
No, not at all. We went through the whole IVF process probably was about 3 years. And then when my husband and I decided enough was enough, and we kind of came to that decision together, it wasn't until almost a year later that I woke up one day. Literally, I was asleep and it woke me up. It was this throbbing, kind of like aching pain. And I always say in my butt because it was literally like at the base of my tailbone. Like it was just like, vroom, vroom. And I thought, well, this is weird. Maybe I'm just getting my period. And throughout the day, it got worse and worse and worse. I actually called my mom or I called my husband first because he wasn't home. Oh my gosh. He was out first day of trout fishing, camping in the middle of nowhere. And he finally, I called my mom. I told her what was going on. She said, wait till Jason gets home. Because I also have a history of kidney stones. So it was kind of like,
Oh, okay.
we didn't really know what was going on. But by the time he got home, I was um, toppled over in excruciating pain. And he took me right to the emergency room. Interesting thing is this was back when Highmark and UPMC were having their
Oh, right.
yes. So my insurance was Highmark. He took me to a UPMC ER. Um, they did, all the ultrasounds and they gave me they gave me pain medication and they came back and said you need to have surgery right now. Your my left ovary was completely encased in an endometrial tumor and it was squeezing it. And
Hmm.
then I had the tumor on my bowel that they found, and they said you have to have this surgery because it was cutting off blood supply to my ovary. So But of course,
I mean, at least you had an answer. At least they were proactive and you had an answer.
yes, until they called my gynecologist, who was a Highmark gynecologist, and she said, "Nope, tell her to go home, come to the office in the morning." So my mom came over in the morning because Jason had to go to work, so we figured I would just be like in and out kind of thing. And mind you, I'm still in excruciating pain, like almost to the point of like throwing up. So I get to the doctor, of course she takes me in, presses on like my abdomen area, like right below my belly button. I almost kicked her in the face. It hurt so bad. She says, "Oh
Right.
yeah, you need surgery." Looking back, it was ridiculous, but I was in so much pain. Like I just,
Right.
so they said,
You can't think at that point. It's like, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do. Just make this
right,
stop.
exactly. Make it stop. I needed to stop. And so they said, "No, you need to go right now." So I called Jason. That's my husband, Jason. Mom took me down to West Penn. By the time we get all the way down there, she literally, I'm in a wheelchair, can't walk, can't talk, get up to the surgery center. And in this part, I don't really remember, but it was almost 3 to 4 hours before they would even give me any pain medication because the UPMC ER I was at wouldn't release my records to Highmark. So they wouldn't give me anything because they didn't know what I had. I just remember him saying like, "Well, you'll be okay in about 2 minutes," because they were giving me the IV.
Right.
Yeah. Um, so I woke up and I was told that they took my left fallopian tube, my left ovary. It wasn't salvageable from the tumors. And I really didn't feel any, I mean, I felt better, but I didn't feel better. Um,
Right.
so long story short, I had to go to this UPMC specialist, which he was great. Terrible bedside manner, but he was fantastic. Um, I had to take Lupron shots for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
What that does is it reduces the size of the endometrial tumors. I had to go and see, oh crap, what's the butt doctor? What's the butt doctor called? Yeah, like the colorectal, what the heck are they called?
Yeah, yeah, that's him. Yep.
Yeah, but
Colorectal.
yeah, because they needed to do all the testing and stuff to see like, if it had infiltrated my bowel, because if it had, then we would have had to do a bowel resection and I would have had a either a colostomy or an ileostomy bag while I healed. Needless to say, for like the next 6 months, I was completely high. I thought I was going to get addicted to like Oxycontin or something. Like I couldn't function without it. You didn't want to be around me if I didn't have it, but I didn't want to take it. And then I'd like lay around and I'd be crying, and my husband saying, "Just take the damn pills." And I'm like, "I don't want to." Like the imaging showed that my bladder was upside down, stuck on top of my uterus from all the endometrial tissue. It was almost like spider webbed. So it had flipped, it had attached to my bladder and flipped it upside down, which is so weird, like, because I
Jeez.
had no symptoms until that day I woke up. So they're like,
That's what I was just gonna ask you. So, like, when you were going through the IVF, was there ever like, a time where they're like, "Let's do an ultrasound, let's do whatever, just to see if anything's going on in there?"
so at first they did, and they, when we first started exploring the whole, why can't we get pregnant thing,
Right.
and nothing was ever said to me about endometriosis. The one thing that they did notice was that my right fallopian tube, I didn't have what they call free flow
Mhm.
into your uterus. So they do the dye
Okay.
and just to make sure that it's
Okay.
open. But that was it. That was all that was ever said or mentioned. Now, what I have learned since then, because I've done a lot of research on it, um, and Noelle, you can probably attest to this too, but all the hormone injections that you have to take with doing IVF or artificial insemination actually grows the endometrial tissue. So it's something that I could have had very minimal amounts of through, and
Right.
then taking all these hormones and everything else and blah 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 blah, it just kind of like blew up. However, the infertility doctors aren't going to say that. My main problem with IVF and fertility was I wasn't producing enough eggs, even
Mm.
with all of the drugs and everything else. I would maybe, and no, I don't know how many you guys actually were able to retrieve at a time, or because you go in for scans and they tell you how many follicles are developed. I would only have like 2 or 3 when most
Oh,
women would
wow.
have like 13 to, like 25, 26, sometimes even more, depending on, where you were at. And I wasn't old by any means. I mean, we were around 32, 33. So it wasn't like I
Okay.
was getting to this
Right.
age where, my eggs were running out anyhow. I think we did 2 artificial inseminations first. And
So this was this before or after
this is
the
this is
endometriosis
before.
diagnosis?
Yeah,
All
this is
before.
all
Okay.
before. So we did 2 of those, and I mean, it's expensive. I don't know what it is over
Right.
across the pond there, but here you're looking at about $25,000 per cycle for IVF. Artificial insemination was a lot cheaper.
Is that when you say artificial insemination, is that IUI?
That's IUI, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I guess they use IUI a lot instead of the artificial insemination, but it was more.
Can you explain the difference between the 2?
So IUI is when they monitor you for regular ovulation, and you then go in and you have the procedure where they inject the sperm into your uterus. And
Okay.
then IVF is when they go in and actually retrieve your egg and his sperm and combine them together. And then once they develop, they implant the embryos essentially, basically.
Perfect.
IUI is basically like an in-clinic version of, like, artificial insemination, which obviously, like, lesbians talk about the turkey baster, which we have a known donor, so we did try to use that method. It's interesting, Rachel, like you said, that you didn't really feel like the fertility clinic, like, gave you that information. One of the things that we kind of came to the conclusion of, and we again got really, really lucky with being successful on the first cycle,
Hmm.
but we did feel like they had our future in their hands and they knew it.
Hmm.
Because there were things where, like, we ended up paying for 2 cycles, of course, and then we got successful on the first one because that's how you do it. There was one point where n our known donor was, going back and forth with them because they had said, "Oh, you don't owe for XYZ," and then on, like, principle, they then came back and said, "Oh, you actually owe us this." So we had our one of our initial consultations, they basically told us, "We can't continue unless you pay this amount right now, like, on the phone," which to us, we were like, "Wait a second, like,
Yep.
we're gonna pay you whatever you want because we want to start a family, like, we're desperate for it,
Right.
and, like, so is everyone else in this situation, and so risk factors, like, some of these other things, they don't, I think, explain very well, and because people are going to that point because they desperately wanna start a family, a lot of times and even if you knew, perhaps in that moment, you would say, "I don't care, like, I want this to be a reality."
Do
But
it.
yeah, to it is a really an interesting, power that they have over people.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, the same thing with us. It was, they wouldn't even start, like, you have your consultation, but like they won't even start anything until full payment is made. I mean, it's a lot. It's an insurance. Again, not sure how things are over in England, but our insurance, um, most insurances in America don't cover it because they don't
Right.
see it as a medically necessary procedure. And that people would use that to their advantage, like, well, I'll just have another baby and then I get to have more welfare or more food stamps or whatever it is. So I actually ended up switching jobs to a company that I knew offered it on their insurance. So
I mean, that's smart.
yeah, I mean, the first one we paid out of pocket. I'm lucky enough to have a family that's very supportive. So they helped us out with it. Um, and then for the second round, like in between that first and that second, I switched jobs, had to wait, get the insurance.
Wow.
And then that second one was all covered. I think the IUI was 5 or 6 thousand for each round. And we did 2 of those. And then we did our first round of IVF. I only had 3 follicles that time. None of them developed. So I didn't even have a transfer at that point. And the transfer is when they develop and they're fertilized, and then you go and you get
Yep.
them implanted. But once we got the insurance and we went back and we did that again, and it's all the waiting too. The waiting sucks because you're waiting to
Yep.
hear, like you're taking your hormones and you're journaling and you're doing all this stuff, and the stress and the anxiety of it is just overwhelming. Waiting to hear how many follicles you actually have, and just because you have 3 follicles doesn't mean they can successfully retrieve those 3. It's overwhelming. You feel like you're letting everybody down, from my husband to my mom, my mother-in-law, my grandmother. At this time, there's 5 of us grandkids that are actually grandkids, not the extension of you guys. Um, that I was the only one that was married. Nobody
Okay.
else had boyfriends, girlfriends, prospects, anything like that. So I felt, not that they put pressure on me, but I felt a lot of pressure. It was so much. Like thank God for Zoloft and Valium, because I'll tell you what, like
Yep.
It's a lot.
it's a lot. It really is. You're driving back and forth every day, or every other day, to the doctors because they got to check and see, because you got to have the timing right. You're poked and prodded, and nobody put that pressure on me. I have generalized anxiety disorder anyhow, so it kind of just built and built
Right.
and built.
Right.
Um, and then finally on that second round, I had 3 follicles they were able to retrieve. Only one of them survived the fertilization. So we had one. And it's funny, Noelle, because I remember exactly where I was when the doctor called me and said I had 1 follicle and it was an A. And I was at your Aunt
Yeah.
Linda's, it was a party, but I was with, Lex, Linda, your mom was there, um,
Aw.
you know, just everybody. Right. And then you like try and hide your excitement because you're like, not
Right.
everybody knows, but you just want to like say something. And because
Yeah.
again, this is literally just your little follicle, this isn't even like a successful
Mhm.
implant at that time.
It's a
Um,
lot.
it is, it really is. And sometimes, a lot of times people blame it on the hormones, but it's really not. It's just your anxiety and everything that you're going through. Yes.
And truly, you don't have to blame it on something. Just going through that
Mhm,
and the ups and downs is enough
exactly.
to make all of these things come up. It doesn't have to be because of a hormone or because of
Yeah.
this.
Mhm.
It just is because it
It
is.
just
It's a
is.
lot.
Right. It is. So then that one, I didn't get my period, so I was kind of anxious, and then my appointment was the week after. Um, and I did cheat and take a pregnancy test, and it did come back positive. So I was
We
really
all do.
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah. They're like, "Don't do it," blah blah blah. I'm like, "Okay, whatever." So I went in and I did my blood work and my urine test, and it had all come up positive. So we were super excited. I was actually at work when my doctor called, and everybody at work knew I was waiting for the phone call. So they're like, so when the phone rang and I went in the back and then I walked by them all real quick, they weren't asking me questions because I wanted to go out and call my husband first. And it was 2 weeks after that, we were scheduled for our first ultrasound, which again, this is just part of the process. It's not generally, when you would normally have one, through a
Right.
natural pregnancy. And so they had us scheduled and we went down, and I knew as soon as the ultrasound tech looked at me. She looked at me and she looked at the screen, and I'm like, "What's wrong? Something's wrong." And it's, "Well, the doctor will come in and they'll talk to you." Okay. Okay. Nerves, anxiety, heart rate, like everything, like I was sweating, and my husband, he has such a flat affect. Like, he does not show any emotion whatsoever, and he's just sitting over there looking at me, and I'm like, "What do you think? Like, what could you see? Did you see anything?" Like you just knew. Just, you know, she
Mhm.
had no poker face whatsoever, because I knew if there wasn't anything wrong, she would have turned the screen towards me. She would have said, "There it is. There's the
Right. Right.
heartbeat." No, that, all that stuff. So, of course they make you have to get dressed and you have to sit there, and they took us into the fertility doctor's office, and he just was like, "There's no fetal stem," which is
Oh, yeah.
I guess what would then develop into an umbilical cord. And he
Right.
said there's no fetal heartbeat. And at that point, I kind of I think I just kind of glazed over and shut down. I didn't say anything. I didn't talk to him. I didn't, and my husband was asking questions like, okay, so what happens next? Like, will she miscarry? Or, do we have to go like have a DNC? Like, all this stuff. And he said, well, we got to go down. We got to go do blood work or something. He said that I could either take there's a pill that you can take, or you can
Mm.
wait for it to happen naturally. And again, I didn't, I shut down, didn't answer, wasn't talking to anybody. And Jason said, well, we'll call and let you know. And I remember going to where you have blood work, and I complete meltdown, and there's people in the waiting room and they're staring at me. And I'm just like, I just want to go home. I just want to go home.
Yep.
So we left, and, um, because you feel so defeated after all that work, after all of that. Now, luckily, Noelle, you didn't have to have that, but you know what I mean by the anxiety of like,
Oh my God, yeah.
the waiting and the wondering and and I think it was like so much, and then I just crashed.
Every step of it is a waiting
Hmm.
game, and, like, I didn't and I wasn't the one going through it, so that is something that Beth sometimes had to remind me of, like, because I think I would try to sort of, like, try to calm her down or say, "Oh,
Hmm.
don't worry, like, if it doesn't work, it's not your fault," and she's like, "I get that you're saying that, but, like, you're not like, it's not your body that's, like, potentially gonna be the thing that fails everything,"
Right.
like,
Right.
and so that was where, we were in it together, but like you said, it is a
Mhm.
very I can only imagine how she must have felt, because I know that for me, like, obviously, again, like, it was an experience we had together, but I can see where each person does sort of internalize so much of it, and I was the partner. I wasn't
Yeah.
the one that was, going to be carrying, so and I remember saying at the
Hmm.
end of, again, we when we realized that, like, when Beth took a positive pregnancy test, like, I don't think that we even got excited because there was just no way in our heads that it was gonna work the first time. Like, it just wasn't gonna happen because you look at the statistics and you look at, you hear all these stories and you think,
Hmm.
"Oh my god, how many times are we gonna have to go through this?" And you wanted to be excited, but, like, you couldn't allow yourself to, and Beth only probably, like, the last month has allowed herself to really, like, now that she can feel the baby kicking, like, she
Hmm.
wasn't there, like, she wasn't at a point where she could really get excited because she was so convinced that something was gonna go wrong.
And we all have that feeling, where it's like you don't want to like build it up to where, yes, oh my gosh, this is going to work, you know, but sometimes that's what you put out to everybody else, but that's not what you're
Yep.
feeling, you
Right.
know.
That's so true. I'm so glad that you said
Yeah.
that. That is I did not go through IVF. I
Mhm.
did have multiple miscarriages. So, having that first
Yeah.
before having children, I never, like, ever could relax being pregnant. Everything
Hmm.
that would go wrong, I was constantly, "Something's wrong."
Yep.
Like, I don't and my sister's the polar opposite. She's like, "Oh, this is wonderful. Like, I love being pregnant." I don't even think I had a moment of that. I went immediately from, "It's positive, something's gonna happen."
Hmm.
Um, and I couldn't get out of my
Yeah.
head because when you start that way, that's all you know.
Right. Right. Yeah. And like I was the type of person that I didn't want I didn't and I had it took me a long time to get over this, but I didn't want other people to feel bad for me. Even though they
Yep.
don't say it, it's like, are they thinking it? And it's like, all right, now everybody like you hide it. You just have this, this mask. And I think that when it was finally like, nope, I just completely was just overcome with it wasn't even like disappointment. It was everything. It was disappointment, it was anger, it was
Yep.
frustration, it was, anxiety. It was just everything all at once. And I was like, I can't handle this. And when we did have the talk about, are we, I said, let's do it again. Cause again, I felt like I let him down. We have this insurance. Should we try this again? And it was actually my husband who said, no, we're not, we need to talk about this, because he said, I can't watch you go through that again. So it took a long time after that to kind of just get used to the idea. And it was very helpful that my cousin got married. So it was maybe 2 years after all of this that he announced that they were pregnant. And I literally sat at my grandma's table, the table, Noelle, the dining room table.
Yep.
They had come out with these shirts that says like, stay calm, I'm the mom, or something. And I just cried. I was so relieved. Like, oh, okay, great.
Right, right.
And that really was a turning point for me. A lot of people would go the other way and be like, well, why not me? But oh no. And I even called my cousin-in-law, like a few weeks later, and I was like, thank you so much for getting pregnant, because I just couldn't handle it anymore. Like,
Isn't that interesting? I love that perspective because you're right. Normally, you would think
Mhm.
they would feel bad announcing because maybe that would upset you or whatever
Right.
it is. But and I also love that you took that time to reach out to her
Mhm.
and to let her know where you stood in
Yeah.
it, because I'm sure somewhere in there, they were worried about you and
Mhm.
how you would react. So I love that you did that for them and let them know, I'm celebrating this as well.
Yes, absolutely. My cousins are more like my brothers. We grew up hand in hand every Sunday at grandma's for dinner. Like, we're all very, very close. And I felt like I really needed to tell both of them, like, don't worry about me. So, and then my sister eventually got married. She has a son now. My mom is a grandma, and grandma was a great grandma 3 times. So, as things progressed in their lives that had to deal with family, I got better. And, my best friend, she has 2 kids. They're like my kids. So we kind of still have that feeling, that sense of it. But then Jason's like, but we get to send them home, and that's good too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Especially the older they get and the mouthier they are. He's like, all right.
It is amazing, like Jenna said, that your attitude about it, like, and I think this is just you, Rachel. Like, I mean, it probably was a choice at some point along the way that you made to look at it on the positive side, but I also think part of that is just in your nature, that you are able to take away from it, like, oh, like,
Yeah.
I get to have these relationships with like these other kids, and I was so relieved when they made Aunt Leslie like a great grandmother, and all
Mhm.
these other things that it would, I'm sure, easily be something where you can sit there and sort of ruminate on what wasn't, but I'm sure that there was still a grief process, like, in sort of reimagining what your future looked like, but
Mhm.
it sounds like you had an amazing support in Jason,
Mhm.
and the fact that were there any points where you guys, like, had a breakdown of your relationship where you, like, struggled to sort of communicate because you were dealing with things differently, or were you pretty much sort of united
Not at
from
all.
the get-go?
Yeah, not at all. We didn't have any issues or arguments or breakdowns in communication or anything like that. Like, he was very understanding. And again, not like he shows it very well, but sometimes he does. But in general, he's always just been like very matter of fact, very flat affect, but he also gets like that because sometimes he just doesn't know what to do, and he doesn't understand why they can't fix me. The endometriosis with the pain and the shots and all that other stuff. He's like, listen, I don't understand. Like, we've been doing this for 6 months. Why isn't it not better? But no breakdown. Um, and like I said, we've been together since I think we were 16, 17, maybe.
Are you having any more issues with the endometriosis, or were they able to clear that up for you?
Oh, okay. So I had I had that first surgery, and then I had to do the shots. I had my second surgery. They successfully removed the tumor from my bowel, and I didn't have to have
Oh, good.
yeah, a colostomy or an ileostomy or anything like
Good.
that. Um, but there's still there. So if you think of your abdomen and all the organs in it, each one should be free flowing. Mine was so bad that nothing was free flowing. They had also taken my right fallopian tube. So there was pretty much no chance of like natural conception whatsoever.
Right.
And I think it was probably about a year after that that I started having pain again. And they did all the testing and everything, and I had a tumor inside of my uterus this time. So I had to go to a gynecologic oncologist because they didn't know if it was uterine cancer or what it was. Um, they did the biopsy. It turned out nope, but it was endometrial tissue. So nothing could be saved at that point. So I ended up with a total hysterectomy at the age of 36. And that's why it needs to be something that people are talking about because
I agree.
yeah, it's like even if you don't have symptoms, like I didn't have any symptoms, and now all of a sudden I have what they called stage 4 endometriosis, and then 2.5 years later I have a total hysterectomy. I couldn't like normally when people have a hysterectomy, they take hormone replacement, and I couldn't do that because there was still bits and pieces and nooks and crannies that they couldn't get of this endometriosis. And if I'd taken estrogen, it would have just blown
Right.
up again.
I think finding a purpose when things like this happen,
Hmm.
can help, and the fact that you're able to talk about this with people and let
Hmm.
them know about it so they don't feel alone. I mean, that's so important
Yeah.
because a lot of people aren't comfortable doing that, so I really appreciate that you did.
Yeah.
Um, what are you as far as what would you tell, someone who's starting out with the IVF process,
Hmm.
as far as giving them some advice that you wish maybe you would have heard before
Hmm.
you began the process?
I would definitely ask them about all risks and all side effects, not just in regards to IVF in general or IUI, but the medications that you're taking and the emotions and the feelings that come along with that. They should offer some sort of therapy and or counseling along with this process. And they don't. You're a
Completely.
robot, you're a guinea pig. You go in there, they take your blood, they do your blood pressure, they do their ultrasounds, they take their little notes and you leave.
It's incredibly unfortunate that
Mhm.
that's the way, and I talked about this on a different episode. That's kind of what pushed me into going into, um, the sex education program I went to and
Mhm.
the life coaching stuff because I saw straight across the board, no matter what it is, whether
Mhm.
it's a type of cancer or whatever you're going through, things change, and that service is not being offered to
Mhm.
people. It just isn't, and I feel like the whole process, and even
Mhm.
on the doctors, could be so much smoother for everyone involved if
Yeah.
that was brought to the forefront as before it
Mhm.
gets to that point where you're like, "I need to talk to somebody," and then everybody's booked,
Yep.
and then you're on a wait list, and it's like, "Okay, now I'm waiting again."
Mhm.
Um, so I agree with you 100%. That needs to be available.
You were going through IVF when before the prevalence of social media, right? Like, so before you could go on and Google every symptom, go on a Facebook group and see, like, all the success stories and
Noelle,
all the
what would you
failures.
do with your life?
I know,
What
right?
would you do, Noelle?
Oh
But
my
it
gosh.
must have changed the trajectory of everything because for us, like,
Mhm.
and we said at one point, we're like, "We cannot go down this rabbit hole again," because we would sit there for hours scrolling and
Mhm.
being like, "What are the first, success in the first round?" Like, just, like, trying to find any like,
Mhm.
scrap of, like, hope.
Yeah.
Um, but it can also be so detrimental. But again, you talk about that support network, and I do think social media can go we know it can go either way, right? Like, it can be real
Right.
nasty, but it can also I do think it can provide that support for people that maybe don't know where else to look. So, what did that look like for
Mhm.
you? Because, like, how in that at that point in time, I don't think infertility was probably spoken about until probably, what, 10, 15 years ago, it sort of became more common to be able to
Mhm.
speak about that. Um, and where did you find
Right.
support beyond Jason?
I really didn't, to be quite honest. I really didn't. Like I didn't talk to anybody. I'd look at all the pamphlets, like you go to the doctor's office and they give you the information and then they give you all the pamphlets and stuff. And, like you could search things online, but it wasn't as in depth as like it is today. I don't really talk about it much to people, but I probably
Oh,
should, like
Yeah.
I
it's
should.
hard. It's hard bringing that up.
Hmm.
And not even that it brings things up, but it's almost just like that's my life. That's kind of how my life, and not that I, like, forget. For me, it's like even with the miscarriages, I don't think about it until
Hmm.
someone else maybe was going through it. And then I'm like, I can offer them support
Yeah.
and just say, like, I went through that. Can I offer you support, or however that looks? But I'm not going to just bring it up into conversation.
Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and for reaching out to me, because it's Beth and I, again, because maybe there's an element of like guilt too, like with being successful the first round, because
Mm.
it is still like we look back and we're like, oh man, like that was a freaking mind fuck. Like what the
Mhm.
hell just happened this last year? Like, but you don't necessarily want, like, it's still like a shared experience as far as like going through all those ups and downs and the waiting period, and obviously everybody's experience is different. Your insight and you sharing your story, like, thank you so much for doing that. And I think I said to you, I'm like, I didn't know that about you, as if you would go around broadcasting it like to everyone, like, and I just missed the
Yeah.
memo.
I have to say, I love how the sun is hitting you right now. Noelle, pause look how the sun is like coming in. Isn't that beautiful?
It's angelic. That's Aunt Leslie though.
It
I
is.
always love that. I'm always like, someone's watching over you. When I see that, I don't know why I
Yeah.
go to that every time, where it just literally looks like there's like rays around you. Okay.
So, Rachel, we always like to end our episodes with a glimmer, which is the opposite of a trigger. Who would like to go first? Because I feel like I had one
I know
earlier
mine.
today. You already know yours.
Mine's super, super easy.
Well, go on then, Jen.
I have 2.5 days left until I am back to drinking lattes. I
Ooh.
literally cannot even wait. I can't. Like, my favorite place I go to, Andrew, shout out to Andrew at Potomac Station. He is making my favorite latte, the featured latte of February, which is the burnt almond tort latte. And he's literally like, I will have it out for you on Saturday. And I'm like, I cannot even wait.
So I guess mine would be so I recently changed jobs. So now I don't work at the golf course anymore, and I have more freedom and free time. So my husband and I are going to Punxsutawney to watch Phil.
Oh, are you? I've
Yep.
always wanted to do that.
So I think my glimmer is going to be, so the other day Rachel, I don't know if you knew this, but my in-laws, so we live on the property of the hotel that Beth's family has run for the last like 40 years. So I work at the hotel. We ran out of gas the other day, which was very stressful because obviously you need gas to heat your hotel. And we had 2 guests that were like had reservations. We only have 14 guest rooms, so it wasn't like the end of the world as I sometimes believe that it is. But because of the fact that we were out of gas, we had to reassign the guests to different rooms where we apparently have oil heating. And it just reminded me that, like, as much as I despise those situations and I am terrible under stress, like I panic at like anything that is not normal or routine. It is such a good learning experience because now I know that if that happened again, like I now know that rooms 6 and 7 apparently have oil heating. So
God,
I
full
wouldn't know that
circle.
otherwise. Wouldn't know
That's
it.
fantastic.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Life and Death Podcast. Please be sure to leave us a review and comment to let us know what you thought of the episode. And don't forget to follow us so you never miss an update. You can email us at lifeanddeathpodcast@gmail.com. You'll find Jenna on Instagram under the handle Jenna Marie Life Coaching, and I, Noelle, can be found at Noelle E. Carlin.
Living death through ups and downs, finding smiles beyond the frowns. Stay with us, we'll light the way. See you next time, bright and gay.